The doorbell of the Savvy Bean Cafe chimed as Beatrice Olsen entered, bringing with her the smell of typical London rain on her simple floral dress. Her curly hair, still damp, framed a tired face after yet another exhaustive day at St. Jude's Primary School, where she had been teaching 5th grade for almost 7 years. She carried a stack of essays to grade and dreamed of a strong coffee before tackling the task. "A cappuccino, please, and a cheese scone," she ordered, settling into the only available table. Beatrice loved her profession with all her heart. She had grown up in the English countryside, the daughter of Mr. Anthony, a respected mechanic in town, and Mrs. Clara, who worked at the local supermarket. Since she was little, she always knew she would be a teacher. There was something magical in seeing a child's eyes light up when they finally grasped a new idea. As she organized her notes, she didn't notice the man approaching her table. "Excuse me, all the seats are taken. Do you mind if I share this table with you?" She looked up and met a pair of dark brown eyes that observed her with kindness. The man wore an impeccably tailored suit, carried a leather briefcase, and exuded a discreet but unmistakably expensive cologne. "Of course, please do," she replied, moving some essays aside to make room. "Julian Mendonza," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Beatrice Olsen, but you can call me Bay." The cappuccino arrived, and with it a conversation that flowed with surprising naturalness. Julian worked at an investment bank nearby, in the financial heart of the City of London. He was the chief analyst for an investment fund, he explained without ostentation, like someone commenting on the weather. "And these essays? Are they yours?" he asked, indicating the colorful papers with children's handwriting. "Yes, I'm a teacher in the public school system," she replied, bracing herself internally for the usual reaction of disinterest that often followed this information. To her surprise, Julian's eyes lit up. "My aunt was a teacher. I always say it's the most important profession of all. You shape the future, don't you?" That was just the first of many encounters. In the following weeks, Julian would appear promptly on Thursdays at the cafe, by coincidence, as he would say with a smile that made it clear there was no coincidence at all. After a month, the casual meetings turned into dinners, strolls through Hyde Park, and cinema outings. Beatrice noticed the differences between their worlds, but Julian seemed not to mind. When she mentioned she lived in a rented apartment in Shoreditch, he replied that he loved the neighborhood for its cultural diversity. When she worried about the price of a restaurant he suggested, he simply changed the suggestion without making a fuss. The first time she invited him to her place, Beatrice spent the entire afternoon tidying her small apartment, aware that he lived in a penthouse in Kensington, information she had casually discovered during a conversation. She prepared a hearty stew, a family recipe her mother had taught her, and bought the most expensive wine her budget allowed. "So your home is exactly as I imagined," Julian commented, looking at the bookshelves filled with books and the plants that dominated the balcony. "Cozy and full of personality, just like you." That night, after the stew and 2 glasses of wine, he kissed her for the first time, and Beatrice felt that something extraordinary was beginning. The following months were filled with discoveries. Beatrice got to know Julian's penthouse, with panoramic views of the London skyline, decorated with an elegant minimalism that matched his practical personality. He took her to Michelin-starred restaurants, but also enthusiastically accompanied her to book fairs and free exhibitions at cultural centres. One Sunday, as they walked through Borough Market sampling fruits, Beatrice mentioned her older brother, Philip. "He was always my protector," she recounted, as she nibbled on a slice of mango. "Ever since we were little, when other children would tease me for being so studious." "And what does he do now?" Julian asked distractedly. "Tech," Beatrice vaguely replied. "He moved to London before me to study computer science at the University of London. He worked at a few startups, then opened his own company. He's very successful." There was something in Beatrice's tone that piqued Julian's curiosity, but she quickly changed the subject, asking about his new project at the bank. Beatrice rarely spoke about her family. Julian knew her parents still lived in the English countryside, and that she visited them during school holidays. He knew about her brother, but had never met him. Philip travelled frequently for work, Beatrice had explained. In contrast, Julian only mentioned his family in contexts of social obligations. "I need to go to my mother's birthday on Sunday," or "My sister is organising a charity event." 6 months after their first meeting at the cafe, over dinner at the restaurant where they had their first official date, Julian took Beatrice's hands in his. B, these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. You brought a meaning I didn't know was missing. Your passion for teaching, your dedication to children, your enthusiasm for simple things. You taught me to see the world through different eyes. Beatrice felt her heart quicken as he pulled a small blue velvet box from his pocket. Beatrice Olsen, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The ring was a discreet solitaire, but with a diamond so pure it reflected all the lights of the restaurant. Beatrice felt tears welling in her eyes. Yes, she simply replied, as Julian slipped the ring onto her finger. The entire restaurant applauded. A bottle of champagne arrived at their table, courtesy of the house. Beatrice felt like she was in a dream, one of those she watched in evening dramas. It was only when they were in the taxi, on their way to her apartment, that Julian casually mentioned, "Oh, my mother is organizing an engagement party for us next weekend at the family's country estate in Surrey. Nothing too elaborate, just family and a few close friends." Beatrice's smile faltered slightly. In 6 months of their relationship, Julian had never introduced her to his family. On the few occasions he mentioned his mother, Regina, or his sister, Vanessa, it was always with a certain emotional distance. "Does your mother already know about us?" Julian hesitated for an instant so brief that Beatrice barely noticed. "Of course, she's eager to meet the woman who stole my heart." That night, lying beside a sleeping Julian, Beatrice looked at the ring on her finger. It was beautiful, perfect. So why did she feel that growing unease in her chest? A voice inside her whispered that she was about to enter a world for which she was unprepared. The next morning she tried to call Philip to tell him the news, but as usual it went to voicemail. She sent a message. "I have news. Call me when you can." The reply came only at the end of the day. "Congratulations, little one. Julian's a lucky guy. Unfortunately, I'm in Singapore closing a deal. We'll talk when I get back." That week, Beatrice divided her time between preparing lessons, grading papers, and trying to find a suitable dress for the engagement party. She visited several shops, tried on dozens of models, but everything seemed either too simple or too pretentious. Finally, she opted for a classic cut navy blue dress, the most expensive she had ever bought, consuming a good portion of her savings. "It will look perfect," the sales assistant assured her, "elegant, without being extravagant." As they wrapped the dress, Beatrice checked her bank balance on her phone and sighed. A month's savings for a few hours of social acceptance. It was worth it, she told herself. It was just the beginning of her new life with Julian, and she needed to make an effort to fit into his world. The ride-share driver whistled softly as he passed through the enormous iron gates of the Mendonza estate in Surrey. Beatrice shrank into the back seat, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach as the car drove down the avenue of century-old trees. "First time at the Golden Trumpet estate?" the driver asked, adjusting the rearview mirror to look at her. "Yes," Beatrice replied, clutching her small handbag. "Is it a well-known place?" "Are you kidding me? The Mendonzas are practically royalty in Surrey. They say this property is over 500 acres. Beatrice felt her mouth go dry. Julian had mentioned a country house, not a historic estate with its own name. He had travelled earlier to help with the preparations, promising to meet her at the entrance. The private road seemed endless, winding past artificial lakes and meticulously maintained gardens. When the main house finally appeared, Beatrice had to stifle an exclamation. It wasn't a house, but a colonial mansion with wide verandas, enormous windows, and a marble staircase leading to the main entrance. The car stopped before the staircase, where a line of luxury vehicles already parked made the driver's modest Honda seem like an intruder. A uniformed valet opened the door for Beatrice. "Welcome to the Golden Trumpet estate, madam." Beatrice stepped out of the car, nervously adjusting her navy blue dress. She paid for the ride and included a generous tip, perhaps out of solidarity with someone who seemed as out of place as she felt. She looked around, searching for Julian, but he was nowhere in sight. Some guests arrived simultaneously, women in designer dresses and men in impeccable suits, all stepping out of imported cars. "You must be the teacher," a feminine voice said from behind her. Beatrice turned and found an elegant woman in her 50s, wearing a designer skirt suit and jewelry that probably cost more than her annual salary. Her grey hair was impeccably styled in a bun, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Regina Mendonza," she introduced herself, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "Julian's mother." "Beatrice Olsen," she replied, shaking the offered hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Mendonza." "Regina, please," the woman corrected, with a practiced smile. Her eyes swept over Beatrice from head to toe, quickly assessing her dress, shoes, and the absence of significant jewelry. "Julian is greeting some important guests in the office. He asked me to welcome you." Regina linked her arm through Beatrice's, guiding her into the mansion. The entrance hall was imposing, with Italian marble flooring and a crystal chandelier that must have cost a fortune. Portraits of the Mendonza family in formal poses adorned the walls, interspersed with artworks that Beatrice recognized as originals by renowned British artists. "Our family has been in Surrey for 5 generations, Regina commented, noticing Beatrice's interest in the portraits. "The Mendonzas helped build this town. That's Julian's grandfather, founder of the bank, and that's his father, who expanded the business into the international market before he passed." They entered a spacious drawing room where about 50 people chatted animatedly, champagne glasses in hand. A string quartet played discreetly in a corner. Waiters circulated with trays of elaborate appetizers. "Allow me to introduce you to some family friends," Regina said, leading Beatrice to a group of elegant women. The introductions were a blur of important names, impressive titles, and evaluative glances. Beatrice tried to memorize the names, smile politely, and answer the increasingly invasive questions. "And where did you study, dear?" asked a lady with exuberant jewelry. "University of Leeds," Beatrice replied. "Ah, a public university," another commented, as if mentioning a contagious disease. "How interesting. And your parents? What do they do?" inquired a third between sips of champagne. "My father is a mechanic. My mother works at a supermarket," Beatrice replied, keeping her head held high. An awkward silence followed her answer, broken by the arrival of a young woman who could have been Julian's feminine counterpart, with the same dark brown eyes, now cold and calculating. "So you're the famous teacher," she said, assessing Beatrice with a disdainful look. "Vanessa Mendonza, the groom's sister." Vanessa wore a red dress that accentuated her perfect silhouette, complemented by discreet but obviously expensive jewelry. "Beatrice Olsen, pleased to meet you." "The pleasure is mine," Vanessa replied without sincerity. "Julian said you're passionate about teaching children. How noble of you to dedicate yourself to such an essential profession, even if not particularly lucrative." Before Beatrice could reply, Vanessa took her by the arm. "Come, let's find my brother. He's busy with some bank associates, but I'm sure he'll be delighted to show off his new conquest." Vanessa led Beatrice through the drawing room, occasionally stopping to introduce her to other guests, always with an introduction that sounded subtly condescending. "This is Beatrice, the public school teacher who won my brother over. Isn't it a charming story?" After what felt like an eternity, they finally spotted Julian talking with a group of men in suits. Upon seeing Beatrice, his face lit up, and he quickly excused himself from his colleagues. "Bee," he exclaimed, hugging her and kissing her lightly on the lips. "You look stunning. I see you've already met my mother and my sister." "Yes," she replied, relieved to finally be by his side. "Your family has been welcoming." Vanessa smiled coldly. "Julian, dear, you should have told us your fiancé was so authentic. She told us about her hard-working parents. What an inspiring story of overcoming challenges." Julian seemed not to notice the venom in his sister's words. "Bee's parents are incredible people. Her father can fix any engine, and her mother knows everyone in their town." "Fascinating," Vanessa murmured. "Well, I'll leave you two alone. Mother needs help with something." As she walked away, Beatrice let out a sigh she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Is everything all right?" Julian asked, taking 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter. "Yes, just a bit nervous. You didn't mention your family was so prominent in the region." Julian shrugged. "It's just old history. It's not something I consider relevant. What matters is who we are, not where we come from, right?" Beatrice nodded, but an uncomfortable feeling persisted. In the following hours, Julian was repeatedly called away by various guests, leaving Beatrice alone for increasingly longer periods. She tried to mingle, initiating conversations about art, literature, or even the British economy, topics she knew well. But invariably the conversation turned back to her profession, her education, or her family. "So you support yourself just on a teacher's salary?" asked a middle-aged man, seeming genuinely intrigued. "I thought most teachers had a husband who, paid the bills." "I'm very proud of my financial independence," Beatrice replied firmly. Of course, the man chuckled, "but now with Julian, well, that problem's solved, isn't it?" Beatrice moved away, feigning interest in a nearby sculpture. She found temporary refuge in the mansion's library, an impressive room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. She was admiring a first edition of Charles Dickens when Regina entered. "I see you found our little sanctuary," she commented, closing the door behind her. "It's an impressive collection," Beatrice replied, trying to sound casual. Regina approached, adjusting a diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Beatrice, may I call you B?" "Of course. B, you seem like an intelligent young woman. So, I'll be direct. I'm concerned about you and Julian." Beatrice straightened up, bracing herself for what was to come. "My son has always had a generous heart, sometimes excessively so," Regina continued. "Since he was little, he would adopt abandoned animals, give his toys to less fortunate children. It's an admirable quality, but one that often leads him to impulsive decisions." "Mrs. Mendonza," Regina, "if you're suggesting I'm a charity project for Julian—" "No, dear, of course not," Regina interrupted, with a smile that showed no warmth. "I'm just observing that you come from very different worlds. Julian is an heir. He was raised to take on responsibilities that you might not fully comprehend." Beatrice felt the blood rush to her face. "I appreciate your concern, but Julian and I—" "Listen, dear." Regina placed a hand on Beatrice's arm. "I'm not questioning your feelings. I'm just being practical. The world Julian lives in is complex. There are expectations, traditions, responsibilities. A wife in that world needs to be more than just a loving companion. She needs to understand the social game, the business alliances, the unspoken language of power." "I'm willing to learn," Beatrice replied, with more confidence than she felt. Regina sighed. "I'm sure you are. But think carefully. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life trying to fit into a world that will never truly be yours? Or does Julian deserve someone who already understands that world, who can be a true partner in all aspects of his life?" Before Beatrice could reply, the library door opened and Vanessa entered. "Here you are. Mother, the Montagues have just arrived and are looking for you, and Julian is looking for his teacher for the official toast." Regina smiled sweetly at Beatrice. "Think about what I said, dear. Sometimes the greatest act of love is recognizing when we should step aside." The two women left, leaving Beatrice alone with her swirling thoughts. She took a deep breath, adjusted her dress, and prepared to return to the party. In the library mirror, she saw her reflection. A beautiful woman, but clearly out of her element, wearing a dress that had cost a month's salary, but which seemed plain compared to the outfits of the other guests. "You can do this," she told herself, "for Julian." With a final sigh, she left the library and headed to the main drawing room where Julian awaited her with 2 champagne flutes and a smile that didn't perceive how lost she felt. The clink of a silver spoon against a crystal glass gradually silenced the crowd in the main drawing room of the Golden Trumpet estate. Regina Mendonza, impeccable in her Chanel suit, smiled at the guests as she positioned herself in the center of the room, Vanessa by her side like a younger, sharper copy. "Dear friends and family," Regina began, her melodious voice carrying that peculiar, refined Mayfair accent. "We are gathered today to celebrate a special moment in our dear Julian's life." Beatrice stood beside her fiancé, her arm intertwined with his, feeling like an actress on a stage for which she hadn't rehearsed. Gus beamed, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort, and the appraising glances the entire room cast in her direction. "As a mother," Regina continued, "I always dreamed of the day my son would find someone to share his life with, someone who understood him, who fit into our family circle, who could be a true partner in every sense of the word." Beatrice felt a pang of anxiety at the emphasis on every sense of the word. "And now, he introduces us to Beatrice." Regina turned her gaze directly to her, with a smile as polished as a freshly sharpened knife. A young woman dedicated to the noble profession of teaching. A politely interested murmur rippled through the room, but Beatrice caught exchanged glances and raised eyebrows. "Let us raise our glasses to Gus and Beatrice. May your engagement be illuminating for both of you." To Gus and Beatrice, the guests echoed, though Beatrice noticed many drank while looking more at Gus than at the couple. After the toasts, the orchestra resumed its soft music, and guests began to circulate again. Gus was quickly surrounded by a group of older men who greeted him effusively. "Come, I want you to meet my godfather," he said to Beatrice, leading her to the group. The men were prominent figures in the American financial scene, bank presidents, investors, entrepreneurs. They spoke of mergers, acquisitions, and market movements as one might discuss a lunch menu. Beatrice tried to follow along, but soon found herself excluded from the conversation. "And what do you think of the new monetary policy, Beatrice?" one of the men suddenly asked, with a smile that suggested he was testing her. "I believe it's creating a false sense of stability," she replied, remembering the economic discussions she used to have with Philip. The artificial reduction of interest rates might stimulate short-term consumption, but it masks structural problems that need to be addressed with deeper reforms. The man blinked, visibly surprised by her articulate response. There was a brief moment of silence before another member of the group quickly changed the subject, as if her contribution had been an inconvenience to be ignored. Minutes later, Gus was called away to sort out some issue with the buffet, leaving Beatrice alone again. She decided to get a glass of water at the makeshift bar in a corner of the ballroom. As she waited, she clearly heard her name mentioned by two women conversing nearby. Pretending to examine a sculpture, she discreetly moved closer. Clearly, a gold digger. One of them, a blonde with a pearl necklace that seemed too heavy for her thin neck, was saying, "Did you see the dress? Must have bought it at a mall clearance sale." "Regina is devastated," replied the other, a brunette with artificially dark hair. "But you know Gus. He always had that idealistic side. Remember when he wanted to work for an NGO after college? Thank God his father straightened him out before he passed. Imagine a Mendelssohn handing out soup to the homeless. Well, now he's bringing one of them into the family." The brunette chuckled softly. "At least she's a teacher, and not one of those colorful-haired activists he used to date in college. I give this engagement 6 months, less if Regina decides to intervene more actively." The two laughed, raising their glasses in a silent toast. Beatrice moved away, her face burning with humiliation. She looked for a restroom where she could compose herself, walking down a corridor decorated with more portraits of Mendelssohn ancestors, all gazing at her with the same judgment she felt in the eyes of the living guests. The restroom was larger than her bedroom, in her Greenwich Village apartment, with Italian marble and gold fixtures. Beatrice looked at herself in the mirror, seeing the first signs of despair in her own eyes. "You graduated with honors from the State University," she whispered to her reflection. "You've taught over 200 children to read. You won Educator of the Year. Don't let these people define your worth." When she left the restroom, she found Vanessa waiting in the corridor, leaning against the wall in a studiedly casual pose. "I thought you'd gotten lost," she said with feigned concern. "I just needed a moment," Beatrice replied. "It must be a lot to take in," Vanessa stepped forward. "All this luxury. Actually, I'm more impressed by the library. That first edition of Machado de Assis is a treasure." Vanessa blinked, momentarily disarmed by the cultured response, but she quickly regained her dismissive posture. Gus always had a thing for the exotic. In college, he dated an exchange student from Tanzania, then a performance artist who lived in a commune, and now a public school teacher. Vanessa gave a sharp smile. "But he always comes back to what he knows, to the world he belongs to." "I think you underestimate your brother," Beatrice replied, keeping her voice calm. "And perhaps you underestimate me too." "Oh, I don't underestimate you, dear. I see exactly what you are." Vanessa took another step, invading Beatrice's personal space. Her clever opportunist, smart enough to spot a winning lottery ticket when he shows up smiling in his Armani suit at your corner coffee shop. "You know nothing about me or about my relationship with Gus." Beatrice felt her blood boil, but she maintained her composure. "I know enough. I know your annual salary probably doesn't cover the cost of that restroom you just used. I know you grew up in, where was it again? Some small town in Kansas where people think the mall is a Sunday outing. I know you see Gus as your ticket to a world you've always observed from afar." Beatrice took a deep breath. "I love Gus for the man he is, not for what he possesses." Vanessa laughed, a melodious and utterly humorless sound. How convenient. To love precisely a man who just happens to have a 9-figure fortune waiting for him. So romantic. Before Beatrice could reply, they heard approaching footsteps. Gus appeared in the corridor, smiling distractedly. "Here you are. I was looking everywhere. Uncle Edward wants to introduce us to the governor." "We were just having a girls' chat," said Vanessa, her tone instantly transforming into sweetness. "Getting to know my future sister-in-law better." Gus smiled, obviously pleased with the apparent harmony. "Great. Shall we be? The governor is a big supporter of public education. You'll have plenty to talk about." As they walked down the corridor, Vanessa whispered in Beatrice's ear, "He'll never choose you over us. In the end, blood is blood." The conversation with the governor was brief and superficial, filled with empty promises about valuing the teaching profession that Beatrice, as a public school teacher, knew would never materialize. But she smiled and thanked him, aware of the appraising glances around her. The night wore on, and Beatrice felt increasingly exhausted by the effort of keeping up appearances. She was in the garden, seeking a few minutes of fresh air, when she overheard a group of men talking near an ornate gazebo. She recognized the voice of one of Gus's uncles, who had been particularly rude during dinner. "He's obviously smitten with her," the man was saying, his voice slightly slurred by too much whiskey. "He always had this rebellious streak. Remember when he wanted to donate part of his inheritance to that literacy foundation?" "The girl is pretty," another commented. "One can understand the physical fascination. And clever enough to spot a golden opportunity. She's probably never seen so much money in her life." The comment elicited widespread laughter. "We can't blame her for trying to climb the social ladder." "Old Augustus must be spinning in his grave," said a third. "He worked so hard to build the Mendelssohn empire, only to see his grandson throwing it all away on some small-town teacher." Beatrice quickly walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. Each comment was like a small stab, piercing the bubble of happiness she had built with Gus over the past few months. Returning to the main ballroom, she found Gus animatedly talking with a group of younger guests, likely college friends. Seeing her, he smiled and extended his arm, pulling her close. "Everyone, this is B, my fiancée," he introduced proudly. "B, these are my friends from my economics days at UCLA." The greetings were polite, but Beatrice noticed the exchanged glances, the discreetly raised eyebrows, the silent evaluations. "So, you're a teacher?" one of the women asked, with seemingly genuine interest. "What subject?" "I'm an elementary school teacher," Beatrice replied. "I primarily work with early literacy for children." "How rewarding," the woman commented, clearly searching for something positive to say. "It must be difficult to handle so many children at once." 35 in my current class," Beatrice confirmed. "It's challenging, but incredibly rewarding to see a child discover the magic of reading." "And how did you two meet again?" one of the men asked, exchanging a look with another friend. "In a coffee shop," Gus replied, affectionately squeezing Beatrice's hand. "I saw her correcting papers and was intrigued by her complete focus on her work." "How romantic," one of the women commented, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Like in the movies." "I like to think it was destiny," Gus said, looking at Beatrice with genuine affection. "Of all the coffee shops in New York City, we ended up in the same one." His sincerity warmed Beatrice's heart, giving her a brief moment of comfort amidst the storm of judgment. The conversation continued, superficial and polite, but Beatrice felt constantly evaluated, like in a job interview for a position she would never be offered. When the group finally dispersed, she took advantage of the moment alone with Gus. "Your friends seem interesting," she commented, trying to sound casual. "They're good people," Gus replied distractedly, observing the room. "We grew up together, went to the same schools. Some work with me at the bank now. Did they know about me? Before tonight?" Gus hesitated almost imperceptibly. "I mentioned I was engaged, of course." "But you didn't mention your fiancé was a public school teacher," Beatrice concluded, more as an observation than an accusation. "I didn't think it was relevant," he replied, seeming genuinely confused. "What matters is who you are, not what you do for a living." Beatrice wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe that for Gus, her job, her background, her world, were not mere inconvenient details to be hidden from his peers. But the evening's events painted a different picture. "Gus, Before she could finish, Regina approached, accompanied by a middle-aged couple. "Son, dear," her voice was honey over ice when she addressed Beatrice, "I want you to meet Paul and Eliza Montgomery. Paul is the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Eliza chairs the country's leading art foundation. Another round of forced smiles, firm handshakes, politely condescending questions. Beatrice felt herself sinking into quicksand, each false smile, each appraising glance pulling her further down. The night dragged on endlessly, a parade of elegant faces and sharp comments disguised as compliments. Beatrice noticed a pattern. Gus was constantly swept away into important conversations, leaving her at the mercy of the guests' glances and whispers. When they were together, he seemed completely oblivious to the poisonous subtext that permeated every interaction. In a moment of relative calm, Beatrice escaped to the terrace, seeking refuge in the night breeze. The property lights stretched as far as the eye could see, a reminder of the vast difference between her world and Gus's. Running away from the party. Regina's voice cut through the silence like breaking crystal. Beatrice turned, finding Gus's mother watching her with an expression that blended pity and triumph. "I just needed some air," she replied, straightening her shoulders. Regina approached, her expensive perfume enveloping Beatrice like a suffocating cloud. "It must be difficult for you," she said with feigned sympathy. "All these people, this world so different from yours." "I'm adapting," Beatrice replied, maintaining her dignity. "Darling," Regina placed a hand on Beatrice's arm, in a gesture that seemed maternal, but felt like a claw. "Anyone can see you're drowning. This world, our world, has rules, expectations, a language of its own that takes years to master. Years you don't have." Beatrice remained silent, refusing to give Regina the satisfaction of seeing her falter. "Think of Gus," Regina continued, lightly squeezing Beatrice's arm. "He has obligations, responsibilities to the family, to the Mendelssohn legacy. Do you truly believe you can help him carry that weight, or will you just be another burden for him?" Before Beatrice could reply, they heard Vanessa's voice coming from the terrace door. "Mum, the Aldridges are looking for you. Something about next month's charity event." Regina smiled at Beatrice, squeezing her arm one last time. "Think about what I said, dear. Sometimes true love means knowing when to walk away." With one last meaningful look, Regina returned to the party, leaving Beatrice alone with her swirling thoughts and a growing sense that she had made a terrible mistake by accepting Gus's marriage proposal. When Beatrice finally returned to the ballroom, the party seemed to have reached its peak. The orchestra played more lively music. Some people danced, and the buzz of conversations had significantly increased with the generous help of alcohol. She searched for Gus among the guests, finally finding him surrounded by a group of young people, laughing at something he had just said. She approached slowly, taking in the scene. Gus seemed completely in his element. Confident, charming, perfectly at ease in his custom-made suit, gesturing with a champagne flute in hand. It was like watching a fish in its natural habitat, moving with instinctive grace in the waters it had known since birth. In that moment, Beatrice saw with painful clarity the chasm that separated them. It wasn't just a matter of money or social status. It was an entire universe of shared references, learned behaviors, unverbalized expectations that formed the invisible web where Gus had grown up, and in which she would always be an intruder, no matter how much she tried to adapt. He finally spotted her and beamed. Come, I was just telling the guys about that time we went to Central Park, and you gave an impromptu lesson to those kids about native trees." Beatrice forced a smile and approached the group. The guys were young executives with clean-shaven faces and studied smiles, all wearing suits that seemed to have come from the same exclusive boutique. "Gus can't stop talking about you," one of them commented with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Says you have a special gift with children. It's fascinating how you chose to dedicate your life to public education," said another, with a tone that made her choice sound like a peculiar eccentricity. "Like collecting rare stamps or juggling." "We need more people like you," added a third with thinly veiled condescension. "Someone has to teach our employees' children, doesn't she?" Gus laughed along with his friends, apparently missing the veiled insult. Beatrice felt her face burn, but she kept her smile frozen. "Actually," she replied calmly, "among my students are children of doctors, lawyers, and even bankers who value our school's pedagogical approach." The comment caused a brief moment of discomfort, quickly dissipated when one of the guys changed the subject to the latest banking sector merger. Gus immediately plunged into the new conversation, while Beatrice once again became invisible, a decorative accessory beside her fiancé. "Excuse me," she eventually murmured. "I'm going to get something to drink." Gus barely noticed her departure, absorbed in a heated discussion about interest rates. At the makeshift bar, Beatrice ordered sparkling water. The bartender served her with a polite smile, the first genuine gesture she had received that night. As she drank, she heard loud laughter coming from a nearby group. She immediately recognized Vanessa's voice, shrill from the combination of champagne and malice. "And then she said she has students whose parents are bankers." Vanessa mimicked Beatrice's voice in an exaggeratedly simplistic tone. As if anyone in this room would enroll their children in a public school. The laughter intensified. Beatrice remained motionless, the cold glass against her now numb fingers. "The funniest thing," Vanessa continued, "is that she actually believes her little job molding Play-Doh with underprivileged kids is as important as what we do. As if teaching the alphabet changes anything in the real world." A wave of indignation surged through Beatrice. She could endure insults about her appearance, her origins, even insinuations about her intentions with Gus. But her work, the passion that drove her every day to wake up at 5 in the morning and face overcrowded classrooms, lack of materials and delayed salaries, that was unacceptable. "Actually," she said, turning to face the group, "teaching a child to read changes absolutely everything in their world." The group immediately fell silent, surprised faces turning towards her. Vanessa quickly recovered, a cruel smile forming on her perfectly painted lips. "Beatrice, darling, we were just talking about your work. So noble." "I noticed," Beatrice replied, stepping forward. "And I'd like to clarify that molding Play-Doh is only a small part of what we do. Primarily, we teach children to read the world, to question, to think critically. Skills that apparently were missing from your privileged education, Vanessa." A shocked silence fell upon the group. Vanessa paled momentarily before regaining her composure. "What a lovely speech," she replied, venom in her voice. "Typical of someone who needs to justify her career limitations. But let's be honest, dear. If your work were truly so important, it would be better paid, don't you think? The market always recognizes true value." An older man, whom Beatrice recognized as Gus's uncle, joined the conversation. "The girl can't be blamed for trying to elevate her status," he said, loud enough to be heard by neighboring tables. "Anyone in her shoes would do the same. She's probably never seen so much money in her life." Laughter erupted all around, and Beatrice felt the stares of dozens of guests turn toward her. The heat rose from her neck to her cheeks, but she kept her head held high. "My worth as a person isn't measured by the size of my bank account," she replied firmly. "Nor is my capacity to love Gustav." "Oh, no one doubts your capacity to love Gustav's bank account," Vanessa retorted, provoking more laughter. Beatrice felt tears welling up, but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Vanessa the pleasure of seeing her crumble. "You don't know me," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You know nothing about me, my life, or my feelings for Gustav." "We know enough," the uncle intervened again. "We see this kind of arrangement all the time. Pretty young women from humble backgrounds who suddenly discover a deep love for rich young men, a story as old as money itself." Beatrice looked around, searching for Gustav, but he was in another corner of the ballroom, still engrossed in his conversation with the executives. She had never felt as alone as she did at that moment, surrounded by dozens of people in formal wear. Regina materialized beside Vanessa, her expression a calculated mix of concern and embarrassment. "Beatrice, dear, you seem upset," she said with feigned solicitude. "Perhaps you should withdraw for a moment to compose yourself." "I am perfectly composed, Regina," Beatrice replied. "Just tired of pretending I don't notice what's happening here." Regina's eyes hardened, though her smile remained intact. "And what exactly do you think is happening?" "A judgment," Beatrice answered simply. "From the moment I stepped into this house, I've been evaluated and deemed inadequate. Not for who I am, but for what I have. Or rather, for what I don't have." A murmur rippled through the group. Regina maintained her frozen smile, but her eyes shot daggers. "No one here is judging you, dear," she said, her voice now audible to a larger circle of guests who had stopped to watch the confrontation. "We are just concerned. Concerned about the compatibility of your worlds, about the difficulties you will surely face." "Concerned about protecting the Mendonza fortune, you mean?" Beatrice retorted, her patience finally exhausted. The entire ballroom seemed to have fallen silent. Even the orchestra had reduced its volume, as if the musicians also wanted to follow the unfolding drama. "How did you say?" Regina's voice was now icy, her smile completely gone. "You are not concerned about Gustav or me," Beatrice continued, adrenaline spurring her to speak truth she had swallowed all evening. "You are concerned about what others will think, about the breaking of tradition, about the dilution of the precious Mendonça blue blood. And most importantly, you are terrified at the idea of sharing your precious fortune with someone you consider inferior." Vanessa stepped forward, abandoning any pretense of civility. "How dare you? You are nothing. You have nothing. What could a little public school teacher possibly offer someone like Gustav?" The question hung in the air like a slap. The silence was total now, dozens of eyes fixed on the confrontation in the center of the ballroom. Beatrice felt something break inside her, not her spirit, but the chains of insecurity that had kept her politely submissive all night. "I can offer genuine love," she replied, her voice clear and firm. "Respect. Admiration for the man he is, not for the size of his bank account. I can offer a partnership based on real values, not on arrangements of social convenience or corporate mergers disguised as marriage." Regina advanced, placing herself between Beatrice and Vanessa. "I think you are not in a condition to continue this conversation, dear. Perhaps we should call Gustav to—" "No," Beatrice interrupted. "We don't need to bother Gustav. In fact, I think I've seen enough of this party." Her heart pounded as she made a decision that would change the course of her life. She pulled her phone from her small purse and quickly typed a message to her brother. "Philip, I need you to pick me up now. Urgent. I'm at Yellow Willow Estate in Aspen Creek." The reply came almost instantly. "Leaving now, 20 minutes. Beatrice put her phone away and looked directly into Regina's eyes. "I appreciate your hospitality, but I believe my presence is no longer necessary or desired. I've already called my ride." "Don't be dramatic," Regina hissed, now visibly annoyed by the scene unfolding before the guests. "Gustav will be devastated if you leave like this." "Gustav barely noticed I was being humiliated in his own home," Beatrice replied, with a calm that surprised even herself. If he truly cared, he would have noticed what was happening. At that moment, as if invoked by the conversation, Gustav finally emerged from the crowd, his face showing confusion at seeing the confrontation between his fiancée and his family. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking from Beatrice to his mother and sister. "Nothing much, dear," Regina replied quickly. "Beatrice is a little tired, that's all." "Bae!" Gustav turned to her, finally noticing her watery eyes and tense posture. "Is everything all right?" Beatrice hesitated. A part of her wanted to expose everything, every veiled insult, every malicious comment, every scornful look she had endured throughout the night. But what would it change? If Gustav hadn't noticed anything until now, it was because he chose not to see. "I'm just tired," she finally replied. "I've called my brother to pick me up. I need to go home." "Your brother?" Gustav looked confused. "But doesn't he live in New York City? How will he get here at this hour?" "He'll manage," Beatrice replied, heading for the ballroom entrance. "He always does." Gustav followed her, visibly perplexed by her sudden change in demeanor. Wait. If something happened, we can talk. If someone said something that hurt you—" "The problem isn't what they said, Gustav," she interrupted, stopping halfway. "It's what you didn't say. What you didn't see, even though it was happening right under your nose." His face showed genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" Beatrice sighed deeply. "All night I've been treated like an intruder, an opportunist, someone who doesn't belong in your world. Your family, your friends, everyone has made it clear they consider me unsuitable for you." "That's not true," Gustav protested, but without much conviction. "You're misinterpreting things. Your sister mimicked my voice, publicly mocked my job. Your uncle insinuated I'm a fortune hunter. Your mother cornered me twice to suggest I should reconsider our engagement. And you noticed none of it." Gustav's face paled. "I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because it shouldn't have been necessary to tell you," she replied, disappointment evident in her voice. "Because you should have noticed. You should have defended me without me having to beg for your protection." At that moment, Regina and Vanessa approached, accompanied by some curious guests who barely disguised their interest in the drama. "Gustav, dear," Regina intervened, Beatrice is obviously overwhelmed. Perhaps it's best to let her rest. Don't talk about me as if I'm not present, Beatrice cut in, her patience completely exhausted. That's exactly the problem. You talk about me, around me, but never to me, as if I were an object to be evaluated and discarded, not a person with feelings and dignity. An awkward silence followed her words. Guests exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others clearly entertained by the spectacle. I think that's enough, Regina declared, her voice cold. You're making an unnecessary scene, Beatrice. A scene? Beatrice let out a humorless laugh. You've spent the entire night humiliating me, and I'm the one making a scene for finally defending myself. No one humiliated you, Regina insisted, though her eyes said otherwise. Do you truly believe that? Beatrice looked around at the faces of the guests. Everyone in this room knows the truth. Everyone participated in the game of let's make the little school teacher feel insignificant, some more actively than others, but all complicit. Gustav seemed completely lost, looking from his mother to his fiancée, as if he didn't recognize either of them. Please, he pleaded, lowering his voice. Let's go somewhere more private. We can talk about this calmly. There's nothing to talk about now, she replied, feeling a strange calm envelop her. My brother is already on his way. I'll wait for him outside. Let her go, Gustav, Vanessa intervened with a malicious smile. She's clearly not prepared for our world. It's better to find that out now than after the wedding. Beatrice stared at Vanessa for a long moment, then turned back to Gustav. Your sister is right about one thing. It's better we find this out now. With those words, she turned and walked with dignity towards the exit, feeling dozens of eyes on her back. No one followed her. Outside the mansion, the night was surprisingly cool for a New York summer. Beatrice sat on a stone bench near the entrance, watching the stars and breathing deeply the clean country air. A strange sense of liberation enveloped her, as if she had finally abandoned a role that didn't fit her. Her phone vibrated with a message from Philip. 5 minutes. Beatrice smiled, imagining the Mendonzas' faces when they discovered who her older brother really was. Not that it mattered now. The veil had fallen, and she saw clearly what was truly at stake. It wasn't just a matter of social acceptance or financial differences. It was about respect, dignity, and fundamentally incompatible values. As she waited, Beatrice contemplated the choices that had brought her there, and the ones she would make from that moment on. One thing was certain. She would never again allow anyone to make her feel inferior for the work she loved so much, or for the origins that made her so proud. In the distance, she heard the sound of powerful engines approaching. Her brother was arriving, and with him the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. The sound of engines echoed through the property as a convoy of 3 impeccably polished black SUVs advanced up the yellow willow-lined driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness like sentinels announcing the arrival of someone important. Beatrice rose from the stone bench, a mix of relief and anticipation coursing through her body. The vehicles stopped in precise formation before the main entrance. From the first SUV, a burly man with the appearance of a security guard descended, wearing a dark suit and an earpiece. He quickly surveyed the surroundings before opening the rear door of the central vehicle. Philip Oliver emerged with the restrained grace of a predator. Tall, athletic, wearing a navy blue Italian suit that seemed sculpted to his body, he exuded a silent authority that needed no announcement. His eyes, the same expressive brown eyes as Beatrice, met his sister's immediately. "B," he called, opening his arms. Beatrice ran to her brother, embracing him tightly. She smelled the familiar scent of his exclusive cologne and let a few tears finally escape. "I'm sorry about this," she murmured against his shoulder. "I know you were busy." Philip gently pulled back, holding her by the shoulders and studying her face. "I'm never too busy for you, little one, especially when you send me a desperate text at 11 at night." 2 other men in suits had descended from the third SUV and positioned themselves discreetly a few yards away, their watchful eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The convoy did not go unnoticed. Lights began to turn on in the mansion windows and curious silhouettes appeared from behind the curtains. "Who are these men?" Beatrice asked, observing the security guards. "My protection detail," Philip replied casually. "A necessary evil when you have the kind of enemies I've made over the years." At that moment, the main door of the mansion opened, and Gustav appeared, followed by Regina, Vanessa, and some curious guests. Beatrice's fiancé looked confused, looking from his fiancée to the convoy of luxury cars and men in suits. "Bay," Gustav called, descending a few steps. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Philip slowly turned to face the group, his face now a mask of polite indifference. Beatrice noticed the subtle change in his posture, shoulders straighter, chin slightly raised, eyes calculatingly cold. It was the posture she had seen him adopt in rare public appearances, when he had to face cameras or investors. "You must be Gustav," Philip said, taking a few steps forward and extending his hand. "Philip Oliver, Beatrice's brother." Gustav automatically accepted the handshake, clearly disconcerted by the formal introduction and the impressive entourage. "Philip, yes, B mentioned you. I didn't expect this." Gustav's eyes swept over the luxurious vehicles, the security guards, the impeccable suit that clearly cost the price of an economy car. "I imagined you wouldn't," Philip replied with a polite but warmth-devoid smile. Regina descended the stairs, her calculating gaze quickly assessing the situation. Years of social interaction with the elite gave her the ability to recognize power and wealth when she saw it, and what she saw before her was someone clearly accustomed to both. "Good evening," she said, extending her hand with her most charming smile. "Regina Mendonza, Gustav's mother. I didn't realize we were expecting more guests tonight." Philip briefly shook the offered hand. "I'm not a guest, Mrs. Mendonza. I've come to pick up my sister." "In a hurry, it seems," Vanessa commented, joining the group, her curious eyes scanning Philip from head to toe with renewed interest. "Did something happen?" "Beatrice sent me a message," Philip replied, his tone now sharper, "asking to be rescued from an unpleasant situation." An awkward silence fell over the group. More guests had come out into the garden, attracted by the commotion and the impressive cars. "There must be some misunderstanding," Regina insisted, casting a warning glance at Beatrice. "We were just celebrating Gustav and Beatrice's engagement, a small family gathering." "Small?" Philip raised an eyebrow, observing the illuminated mansion and the dozens of parked cars. "The interesting definition of small, Mrs. Mendonza." One of the security guards discreetly approached Philip and whispered something in his ear. Philip nodded briefly before returning his attention to the group. "I believe we've taken up enough of your celebration," he said, placing a protective arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "My sister seems exhausted. I'll take her home." "Wait," Gustav intervened, seeming to finally recover from the initial shock. "B, can we talk before you go, in private?" Beatrice hesitated, looking at the man who, until a few hours ago, represented her future. She saw genuine confusion in his eyes, but also a convenient blindness that had allowed her to be humiliated under his own roof. "I think we've talked enough for today, Gustav," she replied softly. "I need time to think." At that moment, an older man emerged from the mansion, Gustav's uncle, who had made particularly cruel comments about Beatrice earlier in the evening. His eyes widened as he recognized Philip. "My God," he exclaimed, loud enough to be heard by everyone around. "Are you Philip Oliver? The Philip Oliver of Oliver Tech?" A murmur rippled through the group. Oliver Tech was one of the largest tech companies in the United States, recently valued at billions of dollars after its expansion into international markets. Its founder and CEO was frequently mentioned among the richest men in the country, though he was notoriously private, rarely appearing at public events or in social media. Philip turned to the man with a polite smile. "Yes, that's me." The murmur turned into a buzz. Regina visibly paled, while Vanessa seemed to have been struck by lightning, her gaze rapidly alternating between Philip and Beatrice, as if trying to reconcile the simple school teacher with the billionaire brother. "You are Beatrice's brother?" Regina asked, her voice now trembling slightly. "Our Beatrice?" "I believe our is an exaggeration, considering the treatment she received tonight," Philip replied, his voice now icy. "But yes, Beatrice is my sister." Gustav seemed completely lost. "B never mentioned... I mean, she said you worked in tech, but..." "Never mentioning my last name or my position was her choice, not mine," Philip explained, looking proudly at his sister. "Beatrice always wanted to forge her own path, to be recognized for her own merits. Admirable, don't you think?" The sarcasm in his last question was palpable. Some guests had the decency to look embarrassed, lowering their gaze or discreetly moving away. Others, however, drew even closer, attracted by the drama and the sudden revelation. "Mr. Oliver," said a middle-aged man whom Beatrice recognized as one of the Mendonza family's banker friends. "It's an honor to meet you. I've been following Oliver Tech's revolutionary work in artificial intelligence. Perhaps we could discuss some investment opportunities." "I'm not here on business," Philip cut in dryly. "I came to pick up my sister." Regina, quickly recovering from the initial shock like the experienced socialite she was, stepped forward with her most charming smile. "Mr. Oliver, Philip, if there has been any misunderstanding tonight, I sincerely apologize. We had no idea Beatrice was your sister." The accidental frankness of that statement hung in the air for a few seconds before Regina realized her mistake. A blush crept up her neck to her perfectly made-up cheeks. "What my mother means," Vanessa quickly intervened, "is that Beatrice never mentioned her family connection. Naturally, that would have better contextualized her presence here." Philip let out a brief, humorless laugh. "Contextualized, interesting choice of words. So, the treatment you give people depends on who their relatives are or how much money they have in the bank?" Vanessa paled. "That's not what I meant." "It was exactly that," Beatrice replied, finding her voice. "That's exactly how you think, and that's why I need to leave." Gustav finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. He approached Beatrice, ignoring his mother's warning glances. "B, if anyone treated you badly, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize." "That's the problem, Gustav," she replied softly. "You didn't realize. You didn't want to realize." A look of genuine pain crossed Gustav's face. "I can fix this. We can talk, work it out." "There's nothing to work out now," Beatrice interrupted. "I need time." Philip watched the interaction with keen eyes, his arm still protectively around his sister's shoulders. When Gustav tried to get closer, he took a step forward, subtly blocking the way. "I think my sister has made her position clear," Philip said, his voice now carrying an undeniable authority. "She needs space. I suggest you respect that." One of the security guards opened the rear door of the central SUV. Philip gently guided Beatrice to the vehicle, ignoring the stares and whispers of the surrounding guests. Before getting into the car, Beatrice turned to face the group gathered on the mansion's grand staircase. Regina, her smile now completely gone, Vanessa, pale and visibly disturbed, and Gustav, confused and hurt. "Just to clarify," she said, her voice clear in the silent night, "I'm not leaving because I'm Philip Oliver's sister. I'm leaving because, his sister or not, I deserve respect for who I am, not for what I have or for who I know." With those words, she got into the vehicle. Philip followed her, closing the door behind him. The security guards quickly took their positions in the other cars, and the motorcade began to maneuver its way out. Through the tinted window, Beatrice watched the Golden Willow Manor and its occupants shrink into the distance. She felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, but also, surprisingly, a sense of liberation. "You didn't have to come personally," she finally said, once they were on the main road. "You could have just sent a driver." Philip smiled, a genuine smile that softened his usually serious features. "And missed the opportunity to see the Montgomerys' faces when they found out who their little school teacher was." "Never." Beatrice couldn't help a laugh, though her eyes were still teary. "It was quite dramatic, wasn't it?" "You always had a flair for the dramatic, little one," he replied, affectionately squeezing her hand. "Ever since we were kids in the countryside of Vermont and you organized those plays in the backyard." They fell silent for a few moments, the soft purr of the luxury engine and the gentle whisper of the air conditioning the only sounds in the insulated cabin. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Philip finally asked. Beatrice sighed deeply, letting the tears finally run freely down her cheeks. "They humiliated me, Philip, not openly at first. It was subtle comments, glances, seemingly innocent questions about my parents, my background, my job, as if they were evaluating defective merchandise." Philip listened intently, his face gradually hardening. "His mother cornered me twice to suggest I wasn't suitable for their world. His sister openly mocked my work, imitated my voice, insinuated I was a gold digger. And Gustav, he just didn't see any of it, or chose not to see." "Idiot," Philip murmured. "The worst part wasn't what they said," Beatrice continued, wiping her tears with a handkerchief Philip offered her. It was realizing that for them, my worth as a person was directly linked to the size of my bank account or my family's social status, as if nothing else mattered. Not my education, my intelligence, my values, my character. People like the Montgomerys live in bubbles, Philip commented. Their worldview is so distorted that they can't see value beyond the zeros in a bank account or the surname on a business card. What hurts me is that I thought Gustav was different, Beatrice confessed. In the first few months, he seemed genuinely interested in me, my work, my ideas. He frequented simple places without complaining, talked to my fellow teachers without condescension. I thought I had found someone who saw beyond appearances. Philip watched his sister for a moment, his gaze softening. Perhaps he really does see, but there's a big difference between appreciating something different from your world and actually confronting your own world for it. The car slid silently along the highway towards New York City, the lights of other vehicles passing like shooting stars in the darkness. So now what? Philip asked. Philip, what do you plan to do? Beatrice looked at the engagement ring on her finger. The diamond that had once seemed discreet now glittered ostentatiously, a symbol not of love, but of a failed transaction. I need to think, she replied, spinning the ring. Part of me wants to believe that Gustav truly loves me, that he was just blind to his family's behavior, that we can overcome this. And the other part knows that even if he loves me, he'll never have the courage to face his family, his world for me. And that even if he did, I would always be the intruder, the outsider, the schoolteacher who was lucky enough to snag New York City's most coveted bachelor. Philip nodded silently, respecting his sister's process of reflection. You know what's most ironic? Beatrice continued with a sad smile. If they had known from the beginning that I was your sister, they would have treated me like royalty. They would have gone out of their way to impress me, to win my favor. The same character, the same person, but a different last name, and everything would change. That's why I never use my last name or position in personal contexts, Philip commented. I never know if people are interested in me or my money. Exactly why I never mentioned you to Gustav or his family, Beatrice agreed. I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for who I know or how much access I have to resources. The buildings of New York City began to appear on the horizon, the city that never slept shining with millions of lights in the approaching dawn. I'll take you to my apartment, Philip said. You can stay there as long as you need to think. No pressure, no interference. Beatrice nodded gratefully, resting her head on her brother's shoulder as she had when they were children. Thank you for coming to get me. Always, he replied simply. The SUV continued down the highway, leaving behind the Golden Willow Manor and perhaps a future that never should have been. The morning arrived with the gentleness of an embrace, the New York City sun filtering through the curtains of the guest bedroom in Philip's duplex penthouse. Beatrice slowly opened her eyes, needing a few seconds to remember where she was and why. The events of the previous night came back in flashes. The Montgomery mansion, the scornful glances, the sharp words, Philip's dramatic arrival, the escape in the middle of the night. The clock on the bedside table showed just past 9, a rare luxury for someone accustomed to waking at 5 in the morning to prepare lessons. Beatrice stretched, feeling the comfort of the Egyptian cotton sheets and the mattress that seemed to embrace her body. Philip's apartment occupied the top 2 floors of one of New York City's most exclusive buildings, with panoramic views of Central Park. It was minimalist and elegant, like Philip himself, without unnecessary ostentation, but with the best money could buy in every detail. Her silenced phone from the night before showed dozens of notifications, 15 missed calls from Gustav, 27 messages, 3 calls from Regina Montgomery, even a message from Vanessa, likely a calculated attempt at reconciliation after the revelation about Philip. Beatrice ignored all of them. She needed time, space to think without the pressure of immediate explanations or rehearsed apologies. She put on one of the Egyptian cotton robes available in the closet and headed to the gourmet kitchen, where she found Philip already impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, typing rapidly on his laptop while sipping espresso. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he greeted, looking up from the screen with an affectionate smile. "Good morning," Beatrice replied, pouring herself coffee into one of the elegant porcelain cups. "Are you already working at this hour?" "It's Saturday." Philip shrugged. "We're closing an acquisition in Asia. Time zone difference. Besides, I can't sit still after 6 in the morning, you know that." It was true. Since childhood, Philip had always been the first to wake up in their modest home in the countryside of Vermont, often already studying when the rest of the family began to stir. "What do you plan to do today?" he asked, closing his laptop. Beatrice sighed, watching the steam rise from her cup. "I need to give this back," she replied, raising her hand where the engagement ring still sparkled, now looking strangely out of place. "Are you sure? Don't you want to think about it a little more? Talk to Gustav?" "I thought a lot during the night," Beatrice confessed. "And the truth is, even if we could get past what happened yesterday, it would always be between us. I would always be the schoolteacher who doesn't belong in his world, trying to fit in, while he would be the heir who condescended to marry someone below his social class." Philip nodded, respecting his sister's decision. "What do you need to do that?" "Just a ride to his apartment. I want to do it in person." "Are you sure? I can send a messenger or—" "I need to do this face to face, Philip. I owe it to myself, and to him." 3 hours later, Beatrice stood before the door of Gustav's Upper East Side penthouse, the ring inside a small velvet box in the palm of her hand. She wore clothes borrowed from one of Philip's assistants, a simple but elegant outfit that revealed nothing about her turbulent emotional state. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Seconds later, the door opened, revealing a dejected-looking Gustav, red eyes, unshaven, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. "B," he whispered, as if he feared she was an apparition that might disappear at any moment. "You came. Can we talk?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest at seeing him so clearly shaken. He stepped aside to let her in. The apartment, normally impeccable, showed signs of disarray. A half-empty whiskey bottle on the coffee table, scattered documents, a tie thrown over the sofa. "I tried to call you all night," Gustav said, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "I was worried, desperate." "I needed time to think," Beatrice replied, sitting on the edge of the sofa, "to process everything that happened." Gustav sat facing her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on hers. "B, I'm so sorry about what happened. I had no idea how my family was treating you. If I had known—" "But you should have noticed, Gustav," she interrupted softly. "It was happening right in front of you, and the fact that you didn't notice says a lot about how we function as a couple." He lowered his eyes, guilt evident on his face. "My mother called this morning," he continued. "She wanted to apologize, said there was a misunderstanding. Vanessa, too. Suddenly everyone wants to make amends." "After they found out who my brother is," Beatrice observed, without hiding the bitterness in her voice. "It's not just that," Gustav protested, though without much conviction. "They realized they hurt you." "They realized they hurt Philip Oliver's sister," Beatrice corrected. "If I were just the schoolteacher daughter of a mechanic, no one would be calling to apologize." Gustav didn't respond, unable to deny the obvious truth in her words. "Why did you never tell me about your brother?" he finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. Beatrice allowed herself a small, sad smile. "Because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for the last name I carry or the connections I have. Because I wanted to be sure that the person I chose to share my life with would value me for my character, my passions, my values. Not for my brother's bank balance." "I love you for who you are," Gustav insisted, reaching out to touch her hand. "I always have." Beatrice gently pulled back, placing the small velvet box on the coffee table between them. "But not enough to defend me when it was necessary. Not enough to notice that I was being humiliated in your own home. Not enough to face your family for me. I can do that now," he promised, his gaze pleading. "I can tell them that either they accept you or—" "Or what?" Beatrice interrupted gently. "You're going to renounce the Montgomery empire? Are you going to give up your place in the family bank? Your last name, your social connections?" Gustav's silence was answer enough. "See," she continued, "and I'm not saying you should do those things. I'm just showing you that there are limits to how much you're willing to fight for us. Limits that are determined by the world you belong to and don't want to abandon." Gustav looked at the box on the table, painful understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're breaking up with me." It wasn't a question. Beatrice nodded slowly. "Not because I don't love you," she explained, her voice trembling slightly, "but because love isn't enough. We need shared values, mutual respect, the courage to defend each other. And most importantly, we need to belong to each other's worlds, not as tolerated visitors, but as equal partners. Tears began to run down Gustav's face. We can build our own world, he argued, in a last desperate attempt. Not when one of us still has one foot firmly planted in their old world, Beatrice replied, standing up. And you do, Gustav. Maybe you don't even realize it, but you do. She walked to the window, observing the city stretching out below. For a moment she imagined the life they could have had, the elegant parties, the international trips, the dinners with high society where she would always be the schoolteacher who was lucky enough to marry a Montgomery. I want you to know that I don't blame you, she said, still with her back to him. You are a product of the environment you grew up in, just as I am of mine. Perhaps in another universe we could have found a middle ground, but in this one I think we both deserve more. What do you deserve, Bea? He asked, his voice choked. What are you looking for? Beatrice turned to face him, feeling a growing certainty in her heart. Someone who sees me completely, who values what I do, not despite the salary or status, but because of the passion and purpose it represents. Someone whose values naturally align with mine, without effort or painful concessions. Gustav stood up too, wiping away his tears with the back of his hand. It was evident, even in his desperation, that part of him understood, that he recognized the truth in her words. I'm sorry, he said finally, for not having been that man. Me too, Beatrice replied, stepping closer to touch his face one last time. You made me happy, Gustav. For a while, I believed we could overcome any difference, but some differences are too foundational. With a final look, Beatrice headed for the door. Gustav did not follow her. Good luck, Bea, he said when her hand was already on the doorknob. I hope you find what you're looking for. Beatrice smiled, a genuine smile even amidst the sadness of farewell. You too, Gustav. I hope you find someone who naturally belongs in your world and still challenges you to be a better version of yourself. The door closed behind her with a soft click, the sound of a chapter ending in her life. 6 months later, the staff room at Charles Dickens Municipal School buzzed with the typical energy of the last week of school before the July break. Beatrice organized her students' final reports, satisfied with the progress they had made in the first semester. 28 children now read fluently, a record for her career. Bea, do you have a moment? Raphael Stone's voice, the science teacher, interrupted her thoughts. Beatrice looked up, smiling automatically at the sight of her colleague. Over the past 3 months, they had gradually grown closer, first discussing interdisciplinary projects, then sharing rides, eventually having coffee after work to talk about books, movies, dreams. Raphael was different from any man Beatrice had ever known. A biology graduate from Columbia University, with a master's in environmental education, he had consciously chosen to teach in the public school system because he believed in social transformation through education. He lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn Heights, drove a 10-year-old compact car, and invested his money in books and trips to national parks, where he photographed nature with almost religious passion. I always have time for you, she replied, pushing her papers aside. I have a proposal, he said, sitting next to her with that contagious enthusiasm that made his students adore his classes. Remember that scientific literacy project we discussed? I got the principal's approval to implement it next semester. An improvised lab, simple experiment kits, field trips to Central Park. His eyes sparkled as he explained the details, his hands gesturing animatedly in the air. Beatrice watched him, feeling that comfortable familiarity they had developed, the feeling of being with someone who shared not just interests, but fundamental values. That's an incredible idea, Raphael, she replied when he finished. It will revolutionize these children's learning. I can't do this alone, he continued, taking her hands in his. I need a partner who understands both literacy and how to spark curiosity in children. I need you, Bea. The way he said, I need you, resonated within her. Sincere, no games, no subtext. Just the simple truth of a man who genuinely valued who she was and what she did. Count me in, she replied, squeezing his hands. His smile lit up the room. Perfect. We can start planning this weekend. I was thinking of going to that science fair in Prospect Park on Saturday to get some ideas. Then we could have lunch there. What do you think? Sounds like a date, Beatrice replied, blushing slightly as she realized the ambiguity of her words. Raphael blushed too, but didn't back down. It can be, if you want. Something in the air between them subtly shifted, a possibility they had both danced around for weeks finally being acknowledged. I do, Beatrice replied simply. Raphael smiled, that genuine smile that never failed to warm her inside. Great, I'll pick you up at 9. That night, lying in her bed in the same rented apartment in Greenwich Village, now decorated with some new plants and bookshelves, Beatrice reflected on the paths life took. She thought of Gustav, who she had learned from recent news was engaged again, to a distant cousin from a traditional old family. She wished him sincere happiness. She thought of Philip, who continued to expand his tech empire while secretly funding digital inclusion programs in public schools, one of them at Charles Dickens, though only Beatrice knew the true source of the resources, but mostly she thought of herself. The teacher passionate about education who had almost abandoned her values for a fairy tale that would never have a happy ending. The woman who had the courage to say no when she realized that the price of acceptance was too high. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was Raphael, sending a link to an article about a new approach to teaching science to children in early literacy stages, with the comment, "This reminded me of our conversation today. I can't wait to create something like this with you." Beatrice smiled at the screen, feeling that sense of belonging that had gradually emerged between them, not because they moved in the same social circles or had the same financial standing, but because, on a fundamental level, they saw the world through similar lenses. They valued the same things. They dreamed the same dreams. In her simple but cozy apartment, Beatrice Olsen realized she had finally found what she was looking for, not in opulent mansions or at gala dinners, but in the authenticity of connections based on true values. And for the first time in many months, she felt completely at peace with her choice.